Welcome to Moments with Marianne. This is your host, Marianne Pestana, and we're here today with special guest, Deborah Eden Tull, who's here to share with us her new book, Luminous Darkness, an engaged Buddhist approach to embracing the unknown. So welcome to the show, Deborah Eden Tull.
Thank you for having me, Marianne. Grateful to be here with you.
Oh my goodness. Well, I'm so excited we get to have this talk about your book. I found it completely impactful. Let's just start from the beginning. So what is Luminous Darkness?
Sure. So my book is called Luminous Darkness, an engaged Buddhist approach to embracing the unknown. And I'm a meditation and mindfulness teacher. I come from a Zen Buddhist background. And I'm also a spiritual activist and deep ecologist. And this book is really about recognizing that as we collectively are facing tremendous unknown, global uncertainty, and each of us personally on our own life journey and spiritual journey, we are each of us required to face and meet the unknown. It's part of being human. That we need more tools and more awareness around how to meet the unknown with grace, with love, with compassion, with respect rather than fear. And one of the premises of the book is that there is a long held, passed down through the generations, duality between light and dark, and within human consciousness, a tendency to hold light as superior and dark as inferior, which not only impacts us personally, emotionally, in how we see ourselves and judge ourselves and one another spiritually, also has led to the overlighting of planet Earth, I would suggest, and causes great confusion because we tend to put everything that's uncomfortable or unwanted in the category of dark. And in this book, I'm inviting people to open fresh eyes to explore what darkness actually is as a great spiritual teacher, as a vital aspect of nature and consciousness, equally vital to daylight, and as an invitation to open our hearts in a much bigger way to the full spectrum of light and dark. So I know that was a mouthful, but I'll pause there. That points a bit, though indirectly, to what luminous darkness is.
So you touched on this briefly. I'd love for you to dive into what darkness really is, because I think a lot of times people, like how you're saying, they just get so confused. They put everything that they don't want to deal with in the dark. So how do we get to this place of balance?
Sure. Well, even in the Merriam-Webster dictionary, darkness is described as the absence of light. And I'm suggesting that darkness is not the absence of light when we let go of that sense and actually tune into it. Again, both physically and metaphorically, symbolically, what actually is darkness. And there have been wisdom traditions throughout the globe, throughout history, who have revered darkness, not only deep respect for the night sky and the instigator of spiritual growth called in through physical darkness, but also darkness as the yin, restorative aspect of nature and consciousness, as opposed to, think of bright lights, speed, the yang, productivity. We're pretty obsessed with those things in the dominant paradigm, but also darkness as representative of the unknown, of the mystery, of that which we can't see and label. And I'm suggesting that there's a real fixation, again, within human consciousness, of, in the face of everything that's uncomfortable to us, turning towards the rational mind, a tendency to try to label, if I can understand, if I can get to the light or lamp of knowledge. We also, in spiritual practice, there can be a tendency to try to get to enlightenment through pushing away the dark and attaining the light. And there's a much bigger opportunity for anyone on the spiritual path and anyone who wants to navigate life with compassion. That's about recognizing the invitation to welcome, to meet with presence to have respect for, to open our hearts to the full spectrum of the human experience. And this contains both light and dark. It's also an invitation to notice the harm caused by being so fixated on light and speed and productivity. And of course, today with our screens and our devices, there's even more momentum around all of this. But I'm suggesting that something gets lost, something around the depth and poetry of our experience, something around an attunement to our interior landscape, our emotions, to the relational field. So consider that even when people just close their eyes, or in meditation, there's a softening of the gaze, we're pausing from the habit of connecting through our visual field with the mind of discrimination or separation, labeling, categorizing everything in life, rather than experiencing life and experiencing ourselves and one another from a deeper center of knowing, intuition, relational intelligence. I talk about this in the book as learning to see from the heart. Again, rather from the mind of judgment and discrimination.
And to get to this type of awareness, did you have your own experience with darkness?
Yes, absolutely. The idea for this book came to me a number of years ago, pre-pandemic, when I was leading a retreat in Big Sur, and it was actually quite a mystical experience I had under the night sky in Big Sur. And as I was digesting and sitting with the experience, I realized that I feel darkness has been my greatest teacher. I feel that the peace and empowerment and compassion and presence that I have in my life has so much been informed by the teachings of darkness. And so, just to share with people, I spent 7.5 years as a monastic at a Zen Buddhist monastery in the Sierra foothills, and now I'm a teacher of meditation and mindfulness. For me, darkness has come through both in always having access to an innate receptivity and empathy and sensitivity, and yet as a young person, often judging that in a world where strength was defined more as force or yang. Darkness has been a teacher in navigating grief. Anyone listening who's navigated intense grief in this life knows the degree to which it changes you and invites you to open up your heart to a much more vast compassion. So for me, one experience of grief that changed me was at the age of 11, finding out one day that my dad, who was my closest friend and mentor and spiritual teacher, to be honest, found out of the blue that he had 1 month left to live. And going through that grief, but also finding out that the world I lived in as a young person was what I call a culture of sunshining, trying so hard to keep things light and positive and push away the uncomfortable, that I didn't find my grief welcome. So it took me a really long time to navigate it. And also as an activist and someone who's been deeply involved in work around the environment and social justice, really ever since I graduated high school, there's a way that we meet the teacher of darkness in this, because we're looking at how to bring healing to layer upon layer of conditioning that has been passed down through the generations as we seek to create a more life-affirming world. And one more I would name, though I could keep going, because on everyone's spiritual path, and listeners, you can tap into this for yourself, you're invited to meet shadow. You're invited to be taught by both light and dark, but certainly to meet shadow and to notice those experiences of when we push away or judge parts of us that then end up being a great sacred messenger and a great source of power when we're willing to do our shadow work. one last piece I'll name is that when I lived as a monastic, I got bit by a tick. And so I also had many years of a journey with Lyme, for a while not even knowing what it was. And that felt in a way like another initiation to the teachings of darkness, because the experience of being required or being forced when it wasn't what I wanted or would have chosen, to slow down, to be in an unfamiliar body, to not be able to meet some of the conditioned standards, again, that have to do with speed and force and yang, really invited me into a much more embodied understanding of self-compassion and of the wisdom of slowing down. My spiritual growth only sped up, is one way I would put it, in that experience. So there's a lot I could say about ways darkness has been a great teacher for me. But I'll invite people to read more about this in my book, and also to look within at their own lives.
You mentioned this when we first started this discussion. When people meet darkness, the first thing that comes up is fear. So how do we get to this place that we are either more curious or treat it with more compassion when we reach that place?
I'd love to share a short quote from the book. And in this quote, I introduce a phrase, endarkenment. And I'll just share that in this book, I talk a lot about the need for endarkenment alongside enlightenment, just recognizing that because of such a long held in history bias against dark and towards light, even our path of meditation and mindfulness can get a little confused when we think it's a path of trying to push away the bad to get to the good, or purify the bad to get to the good. It's not that at all. It's a path of inclusivity. It's a path of relaxing into the presence that welcomes every part of us. It's so deeply healing. So in this quote, I say, the first step to understanding endarkenment is to become curious about darkness beyond your familiar associations. Be open to what you don't know that you don't know about darkness and light, about yourself, about the mystery. We can learn to meet the unknown and the experience of not knowing with an open and humble heart, much more full of wonder and willingness than fear. And going back directly to your question, I talk a lot about the practice of turning towards rather than away from that which we've deemed difficult. So just to give an example, even in meditation, and when I say turning towards with compassion, not forcing ourselves to turn towards when we're not anchored in the soft presence of compassion. But even in sitting meditation, for instance, there's a way that as we sit, anything and everything arises. Pleasant experiences, easy to be with emotions, really painful emotions, uncomfortable feelings we don't have words for, sensations that are hard to be with in the body. And again, we're not trying to push some away to get to the quote-unquote light or positive. We're learning how to sit, how to be here in a quality of presence that's, I think, our most natural state that feels like one of welcome and acceptance and interconnection, where we're being with what is without judging it, without having to categorize it. We're being with. And as we practice being with, it's almost like, to use a metaphor, that when we start meditation practice, we might be like a very small clay vessel, tight and kind of closed, only comfortable being with certain emotions and life experiences. And we could extend out certain conversations, but not others. And as we sit, that slowly and softly and organically begins to open, and we can be with more, and we can stay present through more. And this vessel keeps opening until really it is as big as all of life. And there's a quality of relief and peace and freedom and joy as we recognize that it's our natural capacity to be with the full spectrum and to really recognize the sacred in all of it, because life contains all of it. Thank you for that question. It's a great one.
Well, thank you, and for going through that and explaining that, because I know in your book you mentioned how life is a constant cycle of light and dark, and it makes it so much easier to understand and to accept without judging it and getting into fear about it.
Yes. And it brings so much more peace through that full spectrum. And I'll just name that I always consider nature our greatest teacher on whatever spiritual path we're on. And I had the privilege of getting to spend many years of my life living off the grid in a solar powered community. And so as soon as the sun set, we were met with the darkness of night. We didn't really have a lot of lights on at night. Many people these days in the dominant paradigm have bright lights and then the bright lights of the screen and not much time spent in darkness. But when you do spend time, maybe on a camping trip or another situation, in the darkness, you get to remember what a peaceful and restorative and redemptive blanket it is, we might say, rather than something to fear. You get to notice the mindset that it invites you into, which is different than how we engage in the domain of daylight and busyness and continual productivity. And you get to really tune in and notice the impact on your whole body and being of that continual cycle and flux of light and dark, dusk till dawn, the sacred flux. And I do feel that, especially for young people who haven't grown up in a world where they're living in contact with this cycle of light and dark, something gets lost. And I could also point to just the health impact. There's been so many studies done about the importance for our circadian rhythms, for our natural production of melatonin, for healthy sleep, for the entire endocrine system of spending time in the dark as well as light.
It seems that so many people are so disconnected from nature. Where do you think that disconnection comes from?
I believe it goes way, way back, deep into history, exacerbated during the Industrial Revolution. And in my book, I talk about the intersectionality, the conditioning that we're still living with today that comes from that disconnect from nature, the age of the onset of colonialism, patriarchy, capitalism, the Cartesian era, where again there was a focus on this. The age of enlightenment was a celebration of rationalization. And in fact, anyone who was practicing spiritual traditions that were more about connection with the earth and other forms of knowing, intuition, imagination, body-based practices, this was an era of people getting burned at the stake, the burning times. And I think it's important to recognize that with the momentum, again, from the Industrial Revolution on to how people are living today, there are so many ways in which most people, and in the dominant paradigm is what I'm speaking of, just the way one's home is built, the way our communities are designed. I spent years of my life studying environmental design and architecture and sustainable communities, so this is something I'm fascinated with, are designed in such a way that practically disallows a deep connection with nature. Now, the beauty is nature is surrounding us everywhere and is us, wherever we are all the time. So through intention and attention, where we place our attention, we can re-ground, re-honor, re-celebrate this connection no matter how we're living our life. But think about that even even in recent years, with how quickly screens and computers and the iPhone, we didn't live this way when I was young, have become centerpieces of our life. There's even more invitation for distraction from what is real and true and here in front of us to be experienced through our senses and our earth bodies. One of the gifts of an embodied meditation practice, and one of the gifts of becoming more present, is that we remember a quality of connection with the earth. Again, no matter how we're living or where we're living, that is one of the most healing medicines that humans need in this time. It clears up a lot of confusion. It clears up the entire illusion of anthropocentrism, which isn't true. It brings us into a much greater sense of belonging. And again, this is felt through all of our senses, not something we can experience or understand up in the rational mind. So maybe listeners can just reflect on the different ways that you in your life have reconnected with nature and live in ways that you honor this connection, or perhaps are more hungry for and seeking this connection.
Do you find that when people are reconnecting with nature, or people who are deeply connected with nature kind of feel the pain of what's going on with the world?
Yes, in the way that opening up to one's full experience of life through our senses, through more connection to the interior world, the natural world, and the emotional realm, it's all intermixed. It's part of being more awake to the ever-present field of interconnection. So in that experience, being awake to the ever-present field of interconnection, we are no longer numbed out. We're no longer numbed out. And I will name, it's both the greatest relief in the world, because I think a numbing out is one of the symptoms of the collective disconnect of our times, the crises of our times, really. But also there's a naturally more empathy and compassion. And yes, naturally more tears as well. We wake up to ourselves not as separate, not as this little bubble of me and my separate self, which is maintained through kind of abiding by our thoughts as our primary orientation, or sort of people's thoughts can become their center of gravity. And when we wake down into our bodies and our earth connection as center of gravity, we wake up to something much, much bigger to which we are part. And it feels that there is no separation between the earth and who we are, between self and other. It's a way of experiencing ourselves as part of the natural feedback system of planet Earth. So there can be more tears, but it's deeply held in greater compassion, greater connectedness, and quite honestly, greater joy. Joy and grief are two sides of the same coin. And that means if we're numbing out one, we're numbing out the other. That's another way of pointing to this integration of light and dark. It's just, we can't be fully whole as human beings without recognizing this. We will always be pushing something away or leaving part of us out. We'll always be somehow falsely judging or even falsely perceiving one another. So our wholeness comes from recognizing the partnership of light and dark within and out.
Often I hear people say that they're trying to reach enlightenment. Should we be feeling differently about this?
What I encourage people to remember is that enlightenment is neither an end nor a goal. And I think this is a big misconception. It is neither an end nor a goal. And when we perceive it as an end and a goal, we go about it through a highly conditioned approach that's like I think of it as marketplace mentality, something some people are more aware of than others, but trying to attain something, trying to get somewhere other than here, trying to, again, transcend the difficult stuff to get somewhere else. In my own life, I can name that it was my pursuit of enlightenment as a young person that deeply changed my life and woke me up to a path of incredible healing. And it also woke me up to questioning conditioning that we can even bring to our spiritual pursuits sometimes. This is why in this book I took the step of really talking about endarkenment alongside enlightenment. Though I had never heard that phrase before it came to me while leading retreat, it pointed to helping people see some of the unconscious biases that we even bring to, let's say, our mindfulness practice sometimes. And in a world that's based in capitalism, that intersection between spiritual practice and capitalism, it can seem like even this is something to consume, something I'm separate from, that I'm trying to get out there. In the weekly meditation group that I lead, the title of it is remembering the already awakened state. So we're meditating not to get somewhere, not to attain something, not to reach an end goal, finished, complete, but to remember in what we really are, to remember the already awakened state, to remember that our natural state is this interconnection that I'm pointing to. I hope that's helpful.
It most definitely is. And I think a lot of people will breathe a sigh of relief just knowing, if they, once they start that inward journey, realizing how they are already at this point, they just are remembering.
Yes, yes. And there's so much in today's world that points people to something's missing. You don't got it. It's out there. In fact, maybe it's something you need to buy. Maybe it's something you need to see someone else has, but you don't. It's within. And all of practice is about remembering this and so living in such a way that we help one another to remember this. It's a joyful, joyful path. Yeah.
It's kind of like that quote where we're all walking each other home,
You got it. I love that quote. You got it.
So as we start this path and we're working, with our dark side, how can people release fear?
Yeah, thank you. I think of it as first learning to befriend fear. In the book, I talk about befriending the night. So I remember before I had these tools, I was aware that I had a very fearful part of me, and I judged this part as bad and wrong. So I was very limited in whatever I could go from there. I could either just hang out in the fear and then miss out on opportunities to be courageous or to step it up in my life, or I would sort of push myself off the diving board as a metaphor, which was absolutely not compassionate and didn't help me to access my genuine courage. So I invite people to remember that even in the face of fear, there's always a tendril of courage, even if it's tiny. Just recognizing that courage is the first step, and being willing to befriend the part of us who is afraid, being willing to be with, just like a compassionate mentor, again, or close friend, this part who is afraid, while we're also say, hey, I want more for you, so I'm going to help you step forward in courage, while I'm also holding your hand. And from that kind of stance, we get to really learn how courageous our true nature is and really get to see, because we can only see clearly with eyes of compassion what's the nature of our assumptions of fear were. I also like to remind people that there's two vital sides to a meditation practice. And when I'm talking about meditation, I'm speaking both of formal sitting meditation or walking meditation, and also just a way of being that we bring to every day of our life, informal practice, everyday life as a laboratory. And so picture two hands. On one hand, just a receptive, open palm. This open hand that represents the practice of conscious allowing. And conscious allowing is the invitation to soften, to relax mental effort, which we're practicing in meditation, and to let life be as it is. We learn to let ourselves be as we are. We learn to let emotions be as they are. So even the emotion of fear, we get to experience in a more open-minded, open-hearted way where it has room to move through. We let life be. We might be listening to someone, but just witnessing, just being with, not trying to solve or fix or offering our opinions. So that's the open hand, conscious allowing. On the other side, the other hand is conscious protection. And in Buddhism, an image for this is Manjushri's sword, which cuts through delusion. It's the conscious protection or fierce compassion that we access as well, noticing, oh, as I'm becoming more present, I'm seeing that there are thoughts that take me down a really difficult, really difficult places. I'm going to say no to those thoughts, to begin to drop it when that thought arises and bring myself back to presence. We learn to bring conscious protection to having discipline around our practice because we're sensing and feeling the benefits of becoming more present. Perhaps conscious protection around a relational dynamic that feels unhealthy, toxic. Conscious protection of life becomes stronger in us. And I just want to bring these two hands up as we talk about fear, because they're both equally useful. Sometimes it's the gentle compassion of just being with part of us who is afraid, so that this part knows they are not alone, so that this part doesn't feel judged. This is imperative to healing, going beyond fear. And on the other hand, noticing there are, for instance, fearful thoughts that we need to drop, to let go of, or another form in which fierce compassion is needed. So it's really a balance, a dynamic, this gentle and fierce compassion, which helps us to move beyond fear over time.
When we have this internal balance, is this something that also balances the world around us?
It balances how we experience and perceive the world around us. It brings balance to how we show up in the world around us. It's such a gift to get to show up from center, from presence, with access to both gentle and fierce compassion in how we treat ourselves and how we treat others, to have this beautiful choice and inner compass or intuitive knowing for when a situation requires for acceptance and us to simply be with, and another situation requires for a compassionate action in order to protect life or in order to support someone in need, internally, externally. Yeah, it absolutely changes it. And I also teach trainings for leaders, leadership, and people who facilitate groups. And it's really vital in leadership that we have access to this conscious allowing or gentle compassion and conscious protection, fierce compassion. And I emphasize this because sometimes, again, there's this misunderstanding that compassion is always soft, sometimes, not always so. And it's part of the misconception, I think, that people often hold, that we're trying to be nice all the time instead of learning to be kind all the time. Kind is not always nice, but it does always honor life. Does that discernment resonate?
Yes, I understand completely what you're talking about.
Yeah. I think the world would be a really different place if more and more people understood that and knew how kind felt and really trusted their intuitive sense of how this moment is calling me to show up in the most kind way, but dropping any standard or expectation around niceness that tends to numb people out. Yeah, yeah.
And I would think it also kind of gets into, people are trying to be nice, gets into some of that people pleasing codependency
You've
that,
got it.
yeah, that can cause us lots of problems down the road.
You've got it. Well said. Yeah.
Well, in your book, you talk about the quiet power of receptivity. I'd love for you to expand on that for our listeners.
Sure. So I shared earlier that I see a real bias which holds the notion of power and strength as force, and this kind of tendency to value um, productivity and action and speed and light over receptivity and stillness and slow. And just as I move into talking about this, I'll first just look at our relationship with the natural world. Well, some of us love the wintertime. In general, summer and springtime, it tends to be much more celebrated. Winter is the turning within, the season of gestation and hibernation and slowing down. And we tend to see that as a little less than the brilliance and productivity of summer. And I believe people view and perceive themselves in a very similar way, and have all kinds of beliefs from, oh, I'm of more value when I'm young and more productive, to I'm of more value when on the days I'm full of energy than less. And that leads to unnecessary suffering. And I would share that receptivity is a way of being, again, part of our natural state that many of us haven't been encouraged to fully develop. We've been more encouraged to develop our expressive nature, to be able to offer our opinions at any given moment. But in meditation, we rest in this deep place of presence, back to conscious allowing, receptivity, a deep listening within and out, remembering how to deeply listen to ourselves, not the conditioned mind telling us how we should be, a deeper part of us, and remembering how to listen to life moment by moment as it unfolds. And this is invaluable for living in a more harmonious way with life and with ourselves. And so receptivity, in my experience, is a tremendous source of power. And yet it can often get diminished or undervalued. In my own life, I feel that I've always been a deeply receptive and sensitive person. And yet I didn't recognize the true power of that until a little later in my life. And the relief that, oh, wow, while so many of us women are receiving messages, and every gender, but I'll just speak through my experience as a woman, messages of all that we have to do to get there, to improve ourselves, to prove ourselves, to meet the standards. It's all about doing. Do more, do more, do more. For me, it was when I really finally surrendered to receptivity, non-doing, that I recognized who and what I am in the field of doing absolutely nothing. Puts me in touch with my true nature, my essence, and I recognize the complete wholeness of this essence, the power it holds, having to do nothing at all but be. And I would love for more humans to get this. The world would be a much more peaceful place if humans could get this, could be given the invitation to stop long enough to simply be in the receptivity that I think is our greatest power. And one more thing I'll say about it, because I've spoken about interconnection, waking up to interconnection, who we are beyond our little bubble of separate self. It's through our receptivity, doing nothing but resting in listening, that we're able to wake up to what a profound instrument this body is for relational intelligence. Whether we're receptive towards another in a conversation, whether we're receptive to a tree we're engaging with in our yard, our receptivity to life through the instrument of our bodies is profound. And we just can't drop into that when we're fixated on rational mind or, again, using thought as our center of gravity.
Is there a practice that you can walk us through real quick that our listeners can take with them throughout their day?
Sure. I'll say that there are so many different practices in the book, from practices around conscious allowing and doing nothing to practices for deep listening, practices for dreaming, because this is a part of remembering the power of luminous darkness as well. I think I'd like to just guide a short practice that is about having and remembering reverence for the mystery, for the unknown. Because really, in today's world, again, we're facing so much unknown. And just being human, no matter who you are, whatever walk of life, you face the unknown. And so, if listeners are somewhere where they can close their eyes, this is a practice of closing the eyes, so just take a moment, finding a comfortable position and resting your eyes closed. And just take in a couple of deep, full body breaths. If you're not somewhere you can close your eyes, then you can return and do this a little bit later. So just feeling the air as it enters your body, fills your body, and leaves your body. Give yourself permission to rest, to just be here. Letting go of cares and concerns from the day, and just turning within. And then sitting here, I invite you to imagine that you're sitting next to a window. And this is a window not to the light of day, but a window into luminous darkness. A window into the pitch velvety black of the night sky, the mystery itself, the unknown universe. Just notice how it feels to sit beside this window, safely where you are, perhaps feeling some of the exhilaration we feel under a starry night, perhaps noticing a little bit of fear. That's welcome too. Just notice. And then I invite you to gently rest a hand at the center of your heart. This position naturally invokes compassion, just the tenderness of hand on heart, and noticing how you feel towards the mystery, the unknown. Darkness as the field of all possibility, the mystery from which we all came and to which we will all return. I invite you to offer whatever expression of respect, reverence, loving kindness towards the darkness, feels natural for you. Just offering any expression through words or poetry or just felt sense of respect towards this mystery of which we are all part. Let your body be soft while you do this, considering that it can be typical to send loving kindness to people we can see, to the known. But what is it like to send it to the unknown? And then to gently shift and just ask for receiving loving kindness from the darkness itself, the field of all possibility. And let's take in together a couple more deep breaths now. Beginning to let go of that window beside you and simply come back to this body, your breath, the air touching your skin. And very gently now, I invite you to open your eyes. Thank you.
Well, thank you. What a powerful practice that was. I really appreciate you going through that.
You're welcome. It's really neat to see the more we do a practice like that or other practices that wake us up to the backdrop of darkness, even in the light of day, wherever anyone is listening from right now, to remember that it was dark just hours ago and will be just hours to come. It can invoke a sense of much greater possibility because sometimes we fall into a kind of lazily believing that what we see is set in stone and forgetting the choice we have in every moment, instead falling into habits left and right. And remembering the field of possibility is certainly a prayer I hold for all humanity right now. Remembering the field of possibility.
What would you like listeners to take away from your book? I know we've covered so much.
Thank you. We have gotten to cover, and there are many more topics in the book as well. I talk about the practice of seeing one another clearly in the dark, how darkness can be a teacher of really letting go of judgment and binary perception and learning how to have more heart-based conversations, healing conversations, and see one another as we actually are, not through projection. Again, I talk about dreams and the usefulness of working with our dreams, just as we work with creativity and poetry beyond just the notion that rational mind is the domain of most importance. I talk about leadership and learning to lead in the dark and be led by the dark. I think right now I would like listeners to just notice, even from that short meditation that we did, what may have been awakened within you in this conversation about bringing more curiosity to darkness as a healer, as a teacher, as medicine, and becoming curious about some of the labels you've used, pushing things away through judging them dark. Sometimes our habit, personally and collectively, of trying to, I'll use this phrase again, sunshine our way through life, push away the dark to get to the light, is very energy depleting and very, very unnecessary when we recognize that instead resting in the wholeness that contains the full spectrum is something we can easily do and be restored by in every moment. Yeah. Thank you so much for this conversation, Marianne.
Well, Deborah, thank you. And where can our listeners connect with you and be part of your community and learn more about your work?
Sure. People can visit my website, which is my full name, deborahedentull.com, and I have all kinds of offerings. This is my third book. I offer retreats and workshops in person and online, longer trainings like a 6-month training called The Heart of Listening, and I have a weekly Meditation Sangha, the Fierce Compassion Sangha. There are many ways to connect with me. And you can also find me on Instagram through my nonprofit, Mindful Living Revolution. So I would love to hear from you. I'm always grateful for questions and connection. You're all welcome. Yeah.
Well, Deborah Eden, thank you so much for taking the time to be on the show with us here today.
Thank you again. I really enjoyed being here with you, Marianne.
Well, thank you, Deborah Eden. It has been such an honor to spend this time with you and to talk about your new book, Luminous Darkness. We're going to pause here for a quick moment, and we'll be right back after this message. I'd like to thank Jason Eastwood at Guitarfulness for sharing his inspiring music and talent with us. His music is known worldwide for cultivating atmospheres of harmony, inner peace, and clarity. Visit Jason's website at guitarfulness.com. Join his newsletter, be part of his community, and download his music. Well, we're at the end of our time today. I'd like to thank everyone for tuning in. You've been listening to Moments with Marianne, where we make every moment count.
In a single moment, your life can change. Moments with Marianne is a transformative hour that covers an endless array of topics with the best of the best. Her guests are leaders in their fields, ranging from inspirational authors, top industry leaders, and business and spiritual entrepreneurs. Each guest is gifted and a true visionary, a recognized leader in her own work, and while teaching others to develop, refocus, and grow, Marianne will bring the best guest and sometimes a special surprise. Don't miss this. You never know just which moment will change your life forever. Make sure to tune in and visit momentswithmarianne.com for more information.